Okay, good morning. So we're up to Shin Tes Vov Seif Gimel. We're working our way through the halachas of Ohel, and we're now coming to this Seif deals with a bed. So the bed that we're talking about is that you have two boards on the side, and then you put a table like another board on top, and you sleep on top of that. So the problem is you're making an Ohel, because you've got two sides and you've got the roof coming on top, so that's the problem. So that's what the Mechaber is dealing with. So says the Shulchan Aruch, Mitta Sif Gimel, Mitta Shema'amidim Oisa, when you sort of set up this bed, also lohaniach haraglaim tchila, you shouldn't put the legs first. And then you put the boards across on top. You hold the horizontal boards in place, and then you bring the legs to them. Because if you do it that way around, you haven't made an ohel. If you've got the legs first and then you put the thing on top, you've made an ohel. That's what an ohel is. But if you sort of hover the thing on top, just hold it, and then you sort of bring the legs to it, then that's not a problem. The Mishnah in the Hakdama will explain why that's okay. But that's when the raglaim, the legs, are in the way I just described. But the legs of the beds in our day, says the Shulchan Aruch, and so too the legs of a shulchan, of a table, this is no problem, this is always going to be okay. So let's see the Mishnah. Sif Kotan Yud Zayin Mitzah Hine Kadeshe Novin Heitev Es Divrei HaSif Agdim HaKadomath K'tzara. So in order to understand this Sif, I need a short intro. V'hu Da'after in Binyan Keva. When it comes to binyan of a permanent building, Afim also Ezadav Mashal Loheisif Ala Binyan. Anything you do to be moisif on the binyan, bein mechitzas bein begag, you sort of just put a little mechitza up or a gag, extending it to a fixed building. Chayev, that is tosefes of a binyan, and it's a problem. And certainly if you do and certainly if you make the whole roof, mikol makom the inyan oil arai. But with regard to an oil arai, a temporary ohel, lo osru ba'eses agag lechud im lo she'oses agag k'dei lahagen mipnei hachama v'hagshamu k'yosei b'zeh. There's no prohibition of just making a gag of itself, unless you're making the gag k'dei lahagen mipnei hachama, to protect because of the heat v'hagshamim, or from the rain v'k'yosei b'zeh. To also kutsas b'bechinas ohel, because if you've got just a sort of a horizontal gag, and that is there for protection, that is ka'ein ohel, it's like an ohel. But otherwise, just the gag itself is not the problem. It's when you make the legs the sort of the stands for this roof. Furthermore, now when did they say it's a problem of making this ohel with the legs and the roof? Only when you made it kaseda, i.e. i.e. the legs first and then the roof on top of it. Because then it looks a little bit like oil keva. i.e. well, the way the Mechaber described, that if you hold the horizontal roof in place and then you bring the legs there, that's the opposite seder, and that would be okay. Chazal never asked that. These are all Isurei Drabanan. V'yesh poiskim shesoivrim d'bo'inin she'etzorech gamkein la'avir she'tachtov. For it to be osa, you also need to use the area underneath it. That is what creates. That makes it into a gag that I'm using. I made an ohel because I need the area underneath it. Ukvasayu pasak hamachaber lekam b'sif zayin. And that's the big discussion is going to be making a table. So we'll see in the footnote coming up. Do you need the area underneath the table? So, for example, I don't know if you ever had the experiences, but I remember in the Mir, there are people in that neck of the woods in Mesh Aram and that area where they were tremendous hachmas arachim. So Shabbos they would invite 80, 90, 100 people for Shabbos lunch. So what they do, they would just put a couple of balls out and then another table on top. So that they're mamish doing this. So what they need to do is you put the board out first, and then you take the two legs and you put them in place. Now the shaila is, there are some poskim who say it's only going to be a problem if you need the avir shetachtov. So with a bed you can use underneath for storage, but really when you have a table you're not really using the bits underneath. Your legs go in there. So we'll see that in the footnotes. But that's, according to some, you need to. It's only a problem if you need the avir shetachas the gag.
In that case, why would you bother putting the board out first if there's space in between?
Yeah, so according to them, you wouldn't need to. Yeah, yutches. Okay, so also lohaniach. So you can't put these legs sides up and then the board on top. Says the Mechaber, says the Mishnah Berurah Yudches, but digduk kosav lashon zeh. He uses this expression, with intent. But dafka lo niach also. Dafka placing it on top is also. Dahav bezer kamaschel asos mechitzas loehel. Because by putting the sides up, you then have created ohel. V'also kashemaniach achach kroshimlan. And then by you putting the board across the top, you've made an ohel. If you happen to have two legs standing there, or two verticals, then that's not a problem. Then you can put the kroshim there. But if the bed is very wide, also the okay. Haraglaim techila. So you got to put the leg. If you put the legs first, then you got a problem. To kaderech binyan, because that's how you normally construct it. To haraglaim hey mechitza, v'hakroshim shalakisui kumay gag, and the verticals of the mechitzas, and then you have the gag on top. Nimtza because oisel b'ov Shabbos, and therefore if you do it that way, you've made an oil on Shabbos. V'alkein tzorich l'Shabbos, and therefore, as we described, you've got to change the order. Lech is hakroshim shalakisui ba'avir. You hold the horizontal in place, and then you bring the two vertical legs underneath it. And therefore, Chazal will never geyser in that way. So then we said, when is it a problem? If you do it in that order. Hatam to be'oil arei kazeh she'ena mischavim bas yosel l'shem oil shetachtov and l'tashmish achel gabov milmala, because really you're wanting not the area underneath it, which is what an oil is. You're wanting the area on top. You want to sleep on top of the horizontal. And then just mimela is coming to this sort of shape of an oil. So then they're only going to prohibit it when you've made the mechitzas underneath it. But when you spread some sort of material out to protect from the rain or the heat, the sun, or the area underneath it is usable. So if you've put out some sort of horizontal and you haven't got proper mechitzas there, if you're doing it because you need the area underneath it, either because it's to protect you or you're going to use the area underneath, then that will be a problem even without mechitzas. The listim nekev she'oshen yotzei she'korin komin, to stop up, to plug up if you've got sort of smoke coming out and you want to put some sort of screen on top of it, bakar shel teven v'chayetze by efshe da'osa. You got some sort of you got teven in a place and you've got smoke coming out. Putting a cap on it is going to be also because you've got mechitzas b'fnei atzmai and therefore you putting a thing on top of it is making the ohel. And by the way, in one he says it's like an aruba, so it's a horizontal skylight type of thing, and you covering it over, you've got the mechitzas, and therefore you've made an ohel. Previously we said this is permitted. It's just toisefes oil arai. Hasam aruba ina machzik ala mixes agag. There, the aruba, this skylight, was a very small area in the totality of the roof. Avulkan hanekev shehaoshan yotze. But here, where the smoke is exiting, machazik kol reicha mechitzas shesovivlo. It's the total roof area of the mechitzas that you put in place, and therefore putting a cover on it is making a proper bona fide ohel. And you putting this sort of cushion or whatever it is on top of the gag, on top of the mechitzas, is a proper gag because it's covering the entire area. But if the opening, the window, is from the side, then you haven't got a problem. Because it's dafka when it's going to fashion as a gag, as a roof. To Orach Tosefes Mechitza Ba'alma, you just basically added onto the mechitza. That's not a problem. But if you've got the mechitzas on the side and you put a cushion on top to stop the smoke exiting, then you could have a problem of an oihel. Oid kosav the belech she'osu b'koimin v'kavua sham. So a blech is, we're familiar with it, but in the traditional sense, he says at the bottom number 2, it's a pach. So it's like some sort of metal plate that you're putting the blech she'osu b'koimin. I don't know what koimin is. A what? The skylights, the what? The fire. Yeah, So you put a plate over the fire, the kavua sham. Mutza lista by b'Shabbos v'yontav. That would be allowed to do on Shabbos v'yontav. To hold to kavua sham havikadeles, because that's his natural place and it's havikadeles. And we will come to it, Mr. Hashem. There are lots of applications of this, not today, but in days coming. But if it's hold to kavua sham havikadeles, if it's the normal operation of something, then it's generally not a problem. So we've spoken about folding beds and folding tables. That would not be a problem. So if I want to set this up on Shabbos, that's not a problem, because this is the way how you use it. And so too with the folding bed. What we're talking about here is more, serious construction, putting some sides up and then putting a board on top. That's more problematic. Okay, let's carry on. V'ayim b'tosefes Shabbos. We're halfway through this Mishnah Berurah. V'ayim b'tosefes Shabbos shekosav d'mashem mistapik amogan Avram. The only problem is going to be if the hole where the smoke is exiting is 3 tefachim. Because if it's less than 3 tefachim, you say it's lovud, i.e., it's halachically considered sealed and closed up. And it's sealed, and therefore you haven't got a problem. He's not so sure about this. That they allow you, if it's already less than 3 tefachim, it's sealed up, and therefore putting anything on top of it is not a problem. The whole prohibition anyway is a little bit questionable. It could be the mechitzas underneath it are not proper mechitzas because they've already been made. And just bear in mind, the separate issue of oihel is that if you've got burning coals in the oven and you put a plate on top of it, that could be problematic because mitzad kibui and havara. But by closing the hole of an oven, you're essentially causing the coals to be extinguished. You don't intend this. Nevertheless, it's inevitable. If you stop up the hole and therefore there's no oxygen coming in, you're going to cause the coals to go out. Okay, so then the Mechaber said dapim mechubarin. We said dafka, it's a problem when you've got the raglaim, which are dapim mechubarim k'may dafonei hateva. So you've got the sides and then you put the roof on top. Says the Mishnah Berurah Sif Kotzen Chaf Aleph. Dapin mechubarin b'simen tof kuf beis kosav habeis Yosef the boin sheyam mechitzas magiin ad la'aretz. When is it a problem? When you've got the mechitzas go down to the ground. Ach im somach la'aretz pachas mishalashim sham ein hadefin magia aminin b'zeh lovin. And if they get within 3 tefachim of the ground, it's as if they've hit the ground because of lovid. V'ayin sham magen avram b'shar echrein b'zeh. Well, in teva sheyesh lo shulayim gamel mato. If you've got shulaim coming down even at the bottom, kamoy teva shekarin shlofbank, safsal shena, some sort of sleeping bench. I'm not entirely sure what that is. I am besifid gimel mashenichtu bezeh. Okay, defoni hateva, the sides of a box. Kosavataz, the after betur is a dapin mechubarin. Daled dapin mechubarin, i.e. that the Torah says that you need to have 4 sides for it to be a problem. Lav dafkahu. To permit shederach nishtamish ba'avir mitachas ba'menalayim mechuyetzi b'zeh also afilu kshesh rak shnei dapin mishnei tzodin hamagiyin la'aretz. So for it to be an oyel, it doesn't necessarily need 4 mechitzas on all sides. Even having 2 of them is going to be problematic if you use the area underneath it. The b'shtayim levad choshev oil im mechitzas, because with 2 sides you've already got an oil with mechitzas. Uchaz lekame v'sivov l'inin chaviyos. V'chein kosu shari achronim. Av b'shulchan the matzir hashulchan Orach, who afilu kasheyesh la ma'at mechitzas. But when it comes to a shulchan, even if it has 2 mechitzas or less than 4, the Shulchan Aruch is matir that. But he only asks the shulchan if you've got 4 sides. So in other words, what we're saying, when it comes to a bed, the bed is going to be a problem when you've got even 2 sides. Even if you haven't got all 4 sides, why? Because you're going to use the area underneath it for storage. Mashenke in the Shulchan, if you've only got 2 sides, he said it would be okay. Now, if you look at footnote number 52, he addresses the question we raised just earlier. He says in 52, in the same way as the bed, you do use the area underneath the shulchan. How are you going to sit there otherwise? You're putting your legs under the table. There is a difference between the two. You need the space under the mitzvah for storage. For example, the Gemara says you keep your winter shoes under the bed. You have 2 pairs of shoes, right? Only one for the winter, one for the summer, right? And therefore you keep your shoes underneath the bed, but you use it for storage. In contrast to a shulchan, the essential usage of the shulchan is to use it on top of it, to put things on the table and to eat from it and to learn from it or whatever. It's just that when you use it, it's just comfortable for your legs to go underneath it. But you're not essentially using the area underneath for something specific such as storage or things like that. And therefore, when it comes to the bed, even if you've got only 2 sides, it's going to be problematic because you've got an ohel because you're using the material underneath it. Mashenke in the shulchan, if you're only using 2 sides and not 4 sides, it'll be permitted.
And if you put, let's say, bed against 2 walls, so the actual bed hasn't got any sides.
Then Mistami not doing anything. We're going to come to that with the case of chovius and things like that, I think. Mistama, that will be different, that'll be okay, because you haven't actually got the mechitzas. Will be very similar to what you've said, where you've got the mechitzas, you've got the mechitzas in place already, which is less problematic. Maybe. Okay, Valkain. I'm jumping back to the Mishnah Berurah now, 2 lines from the bottom at the end of the line. You need 4 sides for it to be a proper ohel. They allow you to put the daf on top of the shulchan. Even when there are 4 sides, they allow you to put the top of the shulchan on. The mistama ein storich la'avir shetachtov, because you don't really need the avir tachtov, and therefore it's not really a nohel. Im lo shedarka lishtamish sham, unless you're going to properly use the area underneath it. Ach loshna shulchan aruch shekosav v'chein ragla shulchan mashma de b'shulchan imay mechitzas so gamkein tzorich lahachmeh, that they would say that if there are mechitzas, then you should be machmeh with the shulchan. V'alkein nochem bevadei lochash ledivra taz lecho is adaf ba'avir v'yachnisu tachtov haraglaim, and to do it that way round. So it's interesting. I can't remember what happened in the mirror and those places in the Yerushalmis who are very generously being machnis archim, and how they actually made the tables. I remember seeing. I went just for the chavaya, just to see it. But which way around they do it, because according to this, there are mekilim that with shulchan you never use the area underneath, so there's no problem at all. And even if you have 4 sides, which they don't, they only have 2 sides. But even if you have 4 sides, there are those who are matir it. And there are those who matir it with 2 sides. But still, he says, Alkein nochein bevadai lochash divrei ataz. And if you can, even when you're making this table, to hold the horizontal in place and then to bring the 2 sides. That's the sort of the most chumrah way of doing it, and therefore you've covered all angles. All opinions. Just finishing off now. You're bringing the legs to the place and then you put the daf on top. It looks like a proper construction of an ohel. If they're just standing there, after the shagam yesh mechitzas, then if you've got 2 mechitzas there and you just put something on top of it, he would allow that. Okay, and then he concludes and says, but our beds is mutter b'chol gavna. What does that mean? The ragli hamitzas for shulchanos shelonu says the Shulchan Aruch writing 500 years ago, Ein lahem mechitzas. Our beds don't have these boards. V'nira dechol zeh kasher rafui. So how they stood, I'm not entirely sure. I suppose just thin legs or something like that, not proper boards on the side. Okay. V'nira dechol zeh kasher rafui. This, all of the above, which is a very important point. This is when it's all very loose. You've got boards on the sides, and you're putting a board on top, and it's all quite flimsy. But if you're fixing the boards very, with very firmly into the legs, or like you see with many shulchanos, then it's a clear problem of binyan. Even if you're not sort of fixing it securely, then you've got, even if you don't do it b'chayzek, but if the normal way is, then you've got another problem. You've got to be careful. Which we dealt with. The Chazal made gezeras that you might come to secure it. So, in short, what have we said? That another application of oil is if you were to take two ragli hamid, two mechitzas, and then put a board on top for you to sleep on it, and you've got the storage space underneath. That is a problem. What is the eitzah? The eitzah is put the mechitzas first, and then put the roof on top of it. And then that is not kederech habinyan, kederech oil. And since the whole thing is drabonon of tosefes oil, all right, we're not worried. First bring the top, hold the top, hover it over it, and then you bring the sides in place, and that's the reversed order, and therefore you haven't got a problem. Regarding a table, there are different opinions. Generally, it's more makel, but the best thing to do is just if you follow that sequence as well. But the only thing to note, as he says at the end, is not to secure it too firmly. If it's in very firmly and secure, then you've got problems of binyan.
With these tables, these
tables are folding tables and folding beds. That's not a problem because they're oimed lekach, and you're just opening them out. That's normal operation.
First, and then you're dropping.
Yeah, but here you're just opening the legs. That's the normal function of this thing, which hopefully we'll come to. Say that.